So in this video, we're going to look at Unit 3, a review for our third exam. And in Unit 3, what we were largely looking at is kind of three things. And the big thing of Unit 3 that came out is how do my policies impact, or how do my actions impact others? So we looked at policies and externalities. So Unit 3 is kind of getting out of there's still theory in this unit, but it's kind of getting out of the theory and looking more into policy. So the first little bit we got into with this, we had, let's see, what we called it, monopoly and antitrust laws. This is the first chapter of this unit. And this part we looked at. So we saw with the monopolies can charge a high price and they don't really have to play nice because they don't have any competition, right? If you don't like their product, you just don't buy it. But sometimes monopolies have essential goods like electricity or water. So we need some way to kind of keep them in check, and we need some way to prevent monopolies from happening if possible. Because we don't like monopolies, especially as Americans. We like to have choice. We like to be able to pick. We like to be able to pick stuff. So when we started this chapter, one of the first things we got into was talking about how can firms combine, or how does that really work? So we introduced mergers, acquisitions, or first we introduced mergers and acquisitions. So a merger is, if you remember, when two firms become one. And these are going to be similar to, not example, but they're going to be similar to a marriage. Right. So if you get married, right, you have two people, they come together, and at least from the IRS's perspective, they become one person. That is a merger. On the acquisition side of things, we have when one firm actually purchases another. So just like if I go out and I purchase a computer, I purchase a new car, I purchase a Mountain Dew or whatever it is I decide to purchase, I acquire that good. Similarly, if I go out and I purchase a house, I acquire a house. Firms are kind of the same way, right? If I come out and I say, hey, here's $5 billion, I'm going to run your business now, right? In this case, I'm paying for it, I'm acquiring that business, and it's now mine. So we have that acquisitions, and so on. And if you're looking for like real life examples of them, just be wary of the terminology because they're very oftentimes used interchangeably. You see a lot more acquisitions than you do mergers, but you'll oftentimes see them in the news used interchangeably. You'll see the phrase merger used in place of an acquisition too much, where so a while ago, American Airlines bought US Airways, and I believe it was an acquisition. If you look at the news articles for it, a lot of them will say, oh, there's a merger between American and US Airways, or before that, America West bought US Airways, but then changed their name to US Airways. Again, they purchased this company, but the media, it's often going to be reported as a merger, even if it is an acquisition. So we have these two things, and to kind of help keep things in check, we have what are called antitrust laws. And these are going to be our laws that can that gives the government power to perhaps block these mergers or acquisitions. And even sometimes, and even I'm going to say potentially, break up large firms. So if a firm is too large, they can be broken up into a number of smaller firms. So, and in class we kind of talked about this a little bit more, but what we're interested in is how large is too large. How large is too large, or when does a firm excuse me, or when does an acquisition get blocked or a merger get blocked? And to answer this, we have kind of two ways of looking at this. The first way we did this was called the four firm concentration ratio. And basically what this did is we added the market share of the largest four firms. Four firms. So if we had, say, the top five firms or the top six firms in an industry, so our top six market share was, say, 20%, 15%, 10%, 25%, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8%, and 6%. To find our four firm concentration ratio, I'd want to find the biggest four. So I have 25, 20, 15, and 10. Then I add those together. So our four firm concentration ratio will be equal to 20 plus 15 plus 10 plus 25. Let's see, 25 and 15 gives me 40, 60, 70. So our four firm concentration ratio would, in this case, be 70%. And this would be considered a concentrated market, but we're not super worried about it. So the other case we can look at is what's called the HHI, which is also called the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index. So with this, what we do is we'll find our firms. So we'll have a firm, and they'll have a market share. And then we'll take their market share and square it. So if we have, say we have our automakers, Ford, GM, Chrysler, I guess Chrysler, Fiat, but whatever, Toyota, Honda, and we'll stick with those for now. So if we're trying to figure out our market shares, we are going to, excuse me really quick, I'm just going to make sure that my shares add up to 100. So let's get us some numbers. So suppose Ford has 30% market share, GM has, say, 20, Chrysler maybe has 15, then Toyota will have, say, 23, and Honda will have 12. And all these are percentages: 30%, 20%, 15, 23, and 12. So as we go through this, what we'll do is we'll take each of these and square them. So that's 30 squared, 20 squared, and so on. So 30 times 30 gives us 900. 20 squared will give us 400. 15 squared will give us 225. 23 squared will give us 529. And 12 squared will give us 144. Then if we take all of these, we want to basically just add them up. And if we add these up, we will get an HHI will equal 2,198, which is kind of higher than we'd like to see. But in that case, that's what our HHI came out to. So then we say, well, what if we look and we say, well, would a let's see, let's say would the Federal Trade Commission approve a merger in the following scenario? And we'll say it's below, and we'll say that we have say we have a firm that has 28%, 18%, 11%. So our market share is 28, 18, 11, 8, 5. And then we have, say, 30 small firms with 1% a share. Okay, so we have these number of firms, but this last one, remember, is 30 firms that each have 1 share each. So we could write this out as 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 if we wanted to, but it'll be easier to just multiply this by 30 once we get to that point. So 30 at 1%. So in this case, our market share will come out to, we have 28, 18, 11, 8, 5, and then, 5 equal to 100 minus the sum. I'm just making sure that my problem came out right. 30, cool. So since those are all 1, I'll just be 1, but those are 60, 30. So our market share squared in this case is 784, 324, 121, 64, 25, and 30. Which gives us an initial HHI equal to 1348. So the scenario is, what if a merger of the largest 2 firms? So in this case, what we'll do is we'll kind of make a new case of market share and market share squared. And what we'll do is we'll add these largest 2 firms together. So 28% in the market and the 18%. So that means we have a new super firm that has 46% of the market. Then we have an 11, an 8, a 5, and the 1. And again, the 1 is going to come out to be 30 at that. So this is going to again come out to be 30. But for the other firms, we again have 46 squared. Let me just do it this way. So we have 46, 11, 8, 5, and 30. And I want to again square all these. So in this case, we are going to get, give me just a moment. There we go. Yeah. So in this case, our market share squared is going to come out to 2116, 121, 64, 25, and again 30. So our HHI for this one would be 2356. So the question at hand is, would the FTC approve it? No, the FTC would not approve, or would likely challenge it, because the HHI is now greater than 1800. If the HHI were between 1200 and 1800, then we'd kind of have a maybe. It might get approved, it might not. And if our HHI were less than 1200, then the merger would be approved. or we could say almost certainly be approved, but for the sake of argument, the three options you may have are going to be no, maybe, and yes. In this case, and again, the numbers we're looking for, the barriers are 1,800 and 1,200. We'd like to be under 1,200, but if we're in that middle range, it can be okay, depending on what we see. So after this, we looked at our restrictive practices. And restrictive practices, they can be controversial, but they're not outright illegal. So not illegal like collusion, but can be scrutinized. And what you'll want to do is sometime when you get the chance, look over these different restrictive practices. And I'm just saying that because it's a decent sized list, and y'all can look over lists. So look over these different restrictive practices when you get the chance. Excuse me. So we look over these restrictive practices and just understand them, or understand what they are and what they do. And you'll find these in, I believe it was chapter 11, this chapter on competitive things. So after we got through our this little bit, we started looking at what kind of regulations. So we have our natural monopolies, right? What kind of regulations can we have to help control them, to prevent them from just coming in and really taking over charging too much for the goods or whatever it is they're doing. So we got into two types of regulation. So if we start looking at regulating monopolies, we introduced both cost plus and price cap. And what cost plus regulation did is it said that firms can charge, or mostly monopolists, but can charge the cost of a good, the cost to produce a good, plus a reasonable profit. And with our cost plus, what we saw was the advantage of this is going to be that firms are guaranteed that reasonable profit. They're guaranteed a reasonable but not exorbitant profit. But the downside of this is going to be there's no incentive to innovate. So if I'm guaranteed a profit of whatever percentage I'm going to get, if I'm guaranteed, say, a 30% profit, there's not really a reason for me to come in and try and lower costs. Just because, why would I, right? I'm guaranteed to get a decent profit. I don't really have that incentive to innovate, to find lower cost options or whatever the case is. What the price cap does is kind of opposite. So what this does, well, not opposite, but what this does, it's going to establish a maximum price. that a firm can charge. And this is regardless of what the costs are to actually produce the good. So you have the maximum price a firm may charge. Excuse me. And what this we're going to see is the advantage is that firms have an incentive to keep costs below that price cap, and that's so that they can make profits. But the disadvantages is that it can be inflexible in a time of shock. So if there's something that happens to the electric grid, or something happens to, say you have a natural gas plant and something happens to the natural gas supply, it's going to be hard for them to, if something crazy happens like that, they could potentially not be able to run a profit, or maybe they're going to operate at a loss while this shock or while this event is going on. So that's kind of the disadvantage of it. It's inflexible for the firm. However, if we put it together with the price cap, we can kind of say, well, if we put it with the price cap, we say, well, the price cap will keep their profits all right, but then the cost plus will keep their profits all right, but the price cap can make it so that they have to be mindful of their costs. Again, we don't want our firms to come in and as much as, and again, I think I said this in class when we did this, but this isn't meant to say, oh, certain people don't work hard, but maybe we don't want to pay an entry level customer service rep $500,000 a year, right, or something exorbitant like that. And again, not saying that customer service reps don't work hard. I know they deal with a lot of stuff, but odds are they're not going to make $500,000 a year, and that's probably not their market value. So as we see with these two pieces of policy, again, cost plus and price cap. So after this, we started getting into our externalities. And we had two chapters that covered externalities, positive and negative. If you remember, we started with negative. Our negative externalities. And what these largely looked at is we're looking at, externalities. And we may call this spillover from a transaction that affects, either good or bad, a third party. They're called positive if the third party benefits. And they are called negative if the third party is harmed. Right, you want to be able to identify, so if you're given a scenario, be able to identify if it's a positive or a negative externality. And we can see, how does the market, or what does our graph look like for these externalities? So if we have a negative externality, and we're on that chapter, so we'll focus on that. But if we have a negative externality, we're going to see something like this. So we have our demand going down and our supply going up. And we're going to see the externality is going to push that supply curve to the left. So what we end up with is our market cost and our social cost. Put these two together and we have that, excuse me, we have an externality. And again, this is going to affect the supply side because it's going to increase the cost to produce the good. So a negative externality, again, will push the supply curve to the left, with the idea, again, being that we want our quantity. So we have QM and QS. If we have a negative externality, the market equilibrium will be greater than the socially desirable equilibrium. And in general, what we'll see happen is if we have a negative externality, is accounted for, as we might say, we will see kind of two things happen. And we can see this in the graph too. Our quantity will go down, as we saw here, but our price of the good will go up. So the price in the market and the socially desirable price, so the price will increase. So quantity goes down and the price will increase. Then if you're looking at a graph, so say you have something where you have price, your quantity demanded, your quantity demanded, quantity supplied by the market, and quantity supplied socially, right? And this can be, we can also think of this social curve as if you pay or after paying the cost of the externality. So we figured out how to give the firm that cost, and that's what we're looking at with this. Excuse me, sorry, I had a little sniffle come up. I don't know why, but oh well. So we have all these parts coming in. And suppose that we have prices that go from, say, 20, 16, 12, 8. I'm fine with that. Then we have a demand that goes, say, 0, 1. Oops, my bad. Let's say demand is 0, 2, 4, 6. And it'll say that our market supply, yeah, they'll say that our market supply goes, say, 10, 8, 7, 6. Well, our social supply will come up here, say it's 4, 5, 7, and 3. So in this case, we can be asked, what is our market equilibrium? And for this case, what we're looking at is where the magic point is where QD is equal to the supply by the market. So we're looking for these two to be equal, which we see down here when the price is 8 and the quantity is 6. So then our price will be 8 and our quantity for the market would be 6. And then what is our socially desirable equilibrium? And in this one, we're looking for quantity demand to be equal to the quantity supply social curve. So in this case, we're looking for this to be equal to this, which we find right here at 4 and 4. So in this case, our price, our socially price will be 12, and our socially desirable quantity will be 4. So again, price went up, quantity went down. And that's really what we'd be looking for in that bit. So the next little bit we got into is looking at pollution, and we looked at command and control and market-oriented tools. The first one we'll look at is pollution charges. And excuse me really quick. So if we see something like this, we could come across something where we say we have a permit. So we'll have, say, a marginal cost. Then we will have a uh, emission reduction. And you'll have a tax that say somewhere up here. And you'll have a curve that looks something like this. This curve will be our marginal cost. This will be our tax. Then on this marginal cost curve, you'll see a number of points on it. Right, it'll be like here, 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 here. Right, you'll see a number of points on it. And the question that can come out of this is, oops, that can stay up there. My bad. But the question that'll come up with this is how many pounds, how much pollution will a firm reduce particles by? Right, it'll be given a bunch of. We'll reduce. Let's write that nice. How much pollution will a firm reduce pollution? That's right. How much pollution will a firm reduce? So, and then on each of these points, you'll have points. And your goal with this, I mean, if you see a problem like this, your goal is kind of like a Price is Right rule, right? You want to be closest to your marginal cost being equal to your tax without going over. So in this case, we see that this last one right here is going to be where we go. So if we had, say, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, in this case, we would say that the firm will clean up 12 pounds of pollution. Because if they did anything more than 12, they'd be better off just paying the tax. But anything less than 12, they're fine to just clean up because it's cheaper than paying the tax. And then we did the same thing with tradable permits. So with these, look over the example, just because this one's you make an example of that. But look over the example from class that dealt with these, and really just be comfortable with it. Remember that if the market price is, remember we're just looking at stuff, and this can come up a number of different ways. So suppose that we have a firm, and make sure if you have words, make sure you like read them and really understand what's going on. So I have a problem here. You kind of got to look at it a little bit, but we're told that firm A, that in say year one, firm A has firm A has 400 tons of pollution or 400 units of pollution, and they have 400 pollution permits. Right? So we're given that. So then suppose that in year two, we're told that they reduce their pollutants from 400 to 260, but they also get a fewer pollution permits. So firm A, and again, just read stuff and figure out what they actually do. And if you have to write it down, write it down. So in the second year, firm A emits 260 pollutants. So they emit 260 units of pollution. But suppose that they have 25% fewer permits. So 25% of 400 means that they lost 100. So in year two, firm A will have 300 permits. So for this problem, we see that they have 300 permits, but they only emit 260 units of pollution. So what we'll see happen is firm A, in this case, will end up selling 40 units of pollution. So you may see something like that. And if you do, just remember as you're going through these problems, especially in this when we're talking about policy, just make sure you read it, write stuff out, and take your time with it. And you should be pretty good to go. So we had our pollution charges, then we had our marketable permits. The next thing we have is property rights. And we'll see what these is. The idea of property rights in general is that people will maintain their own property better than others. Oops. They maintain their own property better than others. So if we establish property rights, so these property rights can help establish, or they can help with property rights can help make sustainable practices. And the big example that I used was lumbering, right? Or forestry, whatever the case is. So if we just say, hey, everybody, if you want a tree, go cut a tree down, or go do whatever you want in the forest, or free game, right? If we have that, then people are just going to go in, cut everything they can, and they're going to have issues. However, if we establish property rights, I can go out and I can buy some forest land, and maybe I can set this into tracks where I say, hey, I'm going to cut this much this year, this much next year, and I keep kind of a regrowing process going where two things happen. One, my land gets taken care of and the trees grow back and I have a lifetime supply of income. But two, since I'm using my land sustainably, we're not going to have to in 5 years go in and cut down even more forest, right? Instead, it's just my little section goes through this cycle, and so instead of having to expand out and cut down a bunch more forest, this one little section gets figured out how to best use this one plot of land. And then even as we're doing that, maybe I can find a better way to be to more efficiently plant my trees. So maybe something like that to help But property rights, again, are pretty good to have, and they help that. So as we keep going through the environment, we tended to see is we can look at the environmental protection through a marginal analysis lens. So in marginal analysis, so we tended to see was with our environmental protection, um, as as the environment gets cleaner and cleaner, so as our environment gets cleaner, we're going to see the marginal cost to get even cleaner will begin to rise. That is, it's easy to pick up, and if we think about our own houses, right, it's easy to go through and pick up garbage and pick up the big stuff. But then once you get the big stuff through, then maybe it's a little harder to find the more nitpicky stuff. Then from there, you have to get even more nitpicky, so on and so on. So as we get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, we're going to see that marginal cost will rise, but the marginal benefit will fall. So one of the things that I mentioned when we were on this is that everything's a poison, right? If I go through, if I drink 100 Mountain Dews a day, I'm gonna see some harm. However, if I drink one a week, odds are it's not really gonna harm me at all. Excuse me. So, and same thing with like pools and chlorine, right? At the rate, at the amount of chlorine that we put in a pool, as long as you don't have an allergy, it's not going to harm you in any way, right? You'll be okay. It may dry out your skin a little bit, but for the most part, you'll be okay as long as you don't have an allergy. However, if you were to just breathe in pure chlorine, you'd probably start to see more of a reaction and more issues with that. So, again, the environment, as it gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, it becomes more expensive to keep cleaning, but the marginal benefit gets less and less and less because a little bit of pollution isn't really going to hurt you. And if it's just something very, very small that you can't even notice, it's really not going to hurt you. So marginal costs increase, marginal benefits decrease. And as you're going through, because I'm looking through the questions on the exam, there'll be some things where it gives you a graph. Make sure you read the problem to figure out what the graph is doing and if you even need it, because it could look a little more intimidating than it actually is, uh, and so on. And we can also look at this from a PPF perspective as well. And the PPF perspective that we'll see is between our output and environmental protection. So on the other side of this, we get into our uh, positive externalities. And again, a big thing, read problems. Make sure you're doing things as it says. So I'm looking at one right now where it wants you to plot a private benefit of investing in a company. If it says the private, do the private. If it says the social, do the social. You'll be good to go. Um, but when we, excuse me, but when we looked through, we looked into this example. And remember, positive externalities. So the way that these look is just well, not really the opposite of negative externalities. Excuse me. With our positive externalities, we saw a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve. And with the positive externality, we're going to see additional benefit. So our demand is now going to shift to the left. So we'll have a social demand curve and a market demand curve. Because when I have this externality, it benefits other people that's not necessarily participating in the market. So what we'll see happen with the positive externalities is just like with the negative, we'll have a market output and a social output, where this is our socially desirable output. And this is our market output. And if there is a positive externality, we'll see that the market will underperform socially what the society wants. And with positive externalities, the first we did this example on education. We did an education example, and what I'm going to encourage you to do is look over the positive externalities of education. And again, even if you when you go in to start the exam, if you have them handy, you'll be fine too. But you want to know those. You want to be comfortable with those externalities, and that should work well for you. So, and then with subsidies are tools for the positive externalities are subsidies. Again, you'll want to be able to do something like that graph. But subsidies will make it good, more affordable, and help us get to that socially desirable output, which is again where we want to be. Then one of the big things that this chapter got into. So we had subsidies, tax rebates or credits, and potential for things like grants and fun stuff like that. So as we were going through, we talked about positive externality, and one of the big things that we talked about, so our big example that we looked at, with negative externalities, it was pollution. With positive externalities, it's research and development. So to help with this, we reintroduced our intellectual property rights. And the big three that we looked at, and I already talked about this in this review session actually, so I'm not going to dive too much into these. Well, we talked about patents, trademarks, and copyright laws. And we say, well, these are going to help us come up with research and development. And this is going to come from two fronts. One, I don't have to worry about, well, if I come up with a new idea, someone's just going to steal it. So people are able to, I have a reason to come up with new ideas, new songs, new whatever, and I don't have to worry about it just being stolen from me. But also, well, that's the main idea of it. But this can help others because after that patent is expired, maybe now others can use my idea and innovate off of it. Or maybe I allow somebody to innovate off my idea and someone else is able to benefit from my work or whatever the case is. So those intellectual property rights help research and development, and so on. So we talked about, this was actually, for us, it was before chapter 12. Right here, I'm seeing it right now in my notes. But we talked about rivalrous and excludable. So a good is rivalrous if my use of it either prohibits or inhibits, meaning it either prohibits, meaning someone else can't consume it, or inhibits, meaning make it harder others from using the good. And then we have excludable. And an excludable good is one where you can be prevented from accessing it. Sorry. You can be prevented from accessing. Then with these, we had 4 types of goods that play off of of these two. So I'm going to do a type of good. I'm going to make this into a little chart just so I'm not rewriting the same words 100 times. Then we had rivalrous and excludable. And our 4 types of goods were public, private, common resource, and a club good. And as we go through these, we saw that our public goods were non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Our private goods were rivalrous and excludable. A common resource was rivalrous, but non-excludable, while a club good was non-rivalrous, but excludable. So be able to identify those types of goods, be able to identify which trait each one has, and so on. So we talked about innovation. We talked about innovation and talked about how firms may be reluctant to produce research or to innovate because other people might take their ideas and go with it. So the problem we run into is this issue called the free rider problem. And we talked about this last week. But the free rider problem, excuse me, what the free rider problem is going to do is it's going to say that basically people want others to pay for a public good, but they themselves do not want to pay. Themselves with an S do not want to pay. And we said, right, this is actually a rational thing to do, because I'd rather be able to go on, say, a cruise. I'd rather go on a cruise and not have to pay for it than have to pay for it and go on it. But I'd rather go on it than not go on it. So we run into that situation where nobody's going to want to invest because you're better off not investing, or you're not going to want to contribute because it's going to be there whether you contribute or not as an individual. So why would I bother contributing? And yeah. So that's kind of the key points that we have for the 3rd unit. I'll go ahead and end this recording and we will continue on.